Yes, sirree. Toe high by the 4th of July. I recollect when I lived back in the Midwest, we used to frequently hear the old farmers say, that corn's got to be knee high by the 4th of July. And that used to be true. That was before days of modern hybrids, faster growing corn, and so on. Was the general rule. Your corn in the Midwest, at least, had to be pretty close to the knee if it was going to make a crop by fall. Now, they're referring to hard corn, it's not sweet corn, which takes a little bit longer because it's got to ripen out and dry. But here in Hawaii, we're not really regulated by those rules. We can play by our own here, and so toe high by the 4th of July is just fine. Toe high by Christmas is okay here, too. But as for the rest of you, if you're living in USDA zones 1 through 3, it's probably too late to pull off another crop of corn this year. But if you're living in zones 4 and south, down through the tropics, no problem. As long as you got enough rainfall, and so on, you should be able to do this, especially as you get north, using the earlier hybrids, types of corn that will mature in 60 days or so, something on that order, so that in 2 months you can maybe pull off a crop. As you get further south, what type you plant, it really doesn't matter. Here I use one type year-round, pretty much, the Hawaii Super Sweet varieties. Yeah, I've used number 9, I've used 10, I've used 11. Right now I'm in a big sack of number 10, which is a hybrid bicolor. Pretty good corn, super good corn. Little short on pollen. It needs a pretty dense planting to keep enough pollen in the stand. But other than being short on pollen, it's really a wonderful corn. Now, certainly in the tropics, here in Hawaii, we don't need to start corn plants, right? It's silly. I have my reasons why I do this. Corn can generally, in most places, be directly sown right into the field. You generally don't get a lot of advantage by trying to start it in a nursery and transplanting it, plus it's more work. But what happened to me here in Hawaii was when I started planting sweet corn, first thing is as soon as the birds figured out there was a kernel there, they go through and they pull the whole patch up. Now, this happened till I just finally had it. And so I started the sweet corn in 6-packs in the nursery. And I used protection in the nursery to keep the birds off. And then when I took it out to the field and transplanted, I'd hammer that stuff in the lava dirt so hard there was no way they could pull it out. They finally gave up messing with my corn. I outsmarted the birds. Wow. Anyway, so the size that you see here right now, and if you look, see underneath, see those little white red hairs just starting to protrude out the bottom. It's perfect size for transplanting. The soil's meshed enough from the roots that you can pull it out of there and you can get it in the ground without it falling apart. Don't let it get bigger than this. There'll be no advantage if you're going to start the corn because it will just stunt the growth. Corn is a rocket. It just has to sprint right to the finish, to be able to make a good crop. But anyway, if you have your reasons why starting it in the nursery, like me, that's great. Otherwise, straight in the ground. Sometimes it's advantageous when using the super sweet varieties because the kernels are so high in sugar. If you're planting an early crop and the ground is cold, you might want to start it in the nursery because it's a little warmer and your plants will probably come up rather than having the seed rot. And I know I used to do that in California with super sweet corns and start them in the hoop house and then take them out nice and early. It'd be too cold out in the garden for the seed to germinate, but it wasn't too cold for the corn to grow. Right here in front of you, you will see my morning's work. It's been a bit of a misty morning here. Nice one for transplanting today. I came into a spot over here that I'd flamed recently to get rid of all the weeds. And just pocked holes in the soil there, dropped corn plants in, packed them in good and hard. And then you can't smell it on the video, but those are piles of chicken manure pellets sitting at the base of every stalk over there. That's usually enough fertilizer to be able to grow a crop, although it would be advantageous that I probably halfway to the knee, top dressed with a little bit more of something, I'd get a bigger crop. Anyhow, so you'll see there are 4 rows out here in front. That is the minimum. I mean, if you have 20 rows, 200 rows, much better. Each row has the plants approximately 12 inches apart in the row, and the rows are approximately 1.5 feet apart from one another. That's the general rule. So it's 4 rows by 4 individuals as a minimum to try to get some kind of pollination. And you'll probably find the corn at the outside edges of the patch isn't really pollinated very well. You can tell because what will happen to you is you either have spotty kernels, or you'll find that the tip of the cob didn't fill properly. Things like that is when your pollen isn't getting around. Sometimes it's caused because maybe you have Japanese beetles or snails or slugs eating the silk. And so if the silk gets eaten, it's not going to pollinate properly either. So you got to watch out for that one. But spacing, don't put the corn too close. Crowding it is not to any advantage with corn. Keep the stalks at least about 1 foot apart. If you're not going to plant it in straight rows like I have here, then you can use the Native American form where they planted it usually in what they called hills. And it was oftentimes the 3 sisters. So see over there in the background, we have the Godzilla squash encroaching, which will eventually grow into the corn patch. So that's a compatible combination. Corn, squash, and beans are traditional crops that have been raised together in Native American communities for thousands and thousands of years. The plants do work well, but Native Americans use these crops differently than most of us do today. Most people today grow sweet corn in their gardens. And Native Americans didn't raise much sweet corn. Most corn was raised to the hard grain form, and then it was ground or turned to hominy or some other process where it became a serious carbohydrate in their diets. And they usually did not eat the plant in the immature green form. Popcorn was known, as well as parching corn, hominy corns. Again, all these, though, they ripen all the way out, you see. And when it came to beans, Native Americans really didn't eat a whole lot of green beans, or snap beans, as we call them. Most of the bean was to the hard, dry state, and then, again, used as a protein source and a carbohydrate. Plain old dry beans, man. Pinto beans and tortillas, like that. And so, and the squash even, now the fruits of squash, in the Southwest at least, were used as food, but a lot of times they used them as cooking bowls. Yeah, they would, cut the top off and scoop seeds out and then put their stew or soup or whatever it was. I've cooked cornbread with jalapenos, cheese and onions and tomatoes in a squash before. I've made chicken soup in a squash before. That's a Navajo recipe. It's very cool. This does work. Yeah, you can do that, and then you can eat the whole squash full of chicken soup or whatever it is. But for the most part, the squash was also raised for the seeds. The seeds were the important part. That's what they were really after. Vegetable matter wasn't really all that hard to get. It was getting things like fats, proteins, carbohydrates. This is where the project was in agriculture. And so when they planted 3 sisters, everything was pretty much left to just go hard, dry, and fall out there in the field and turn crumbly and brown. And then you'd go in and you'd strip down your bean pods, you break off your corn ears and bring them in, you pick up all the squashes. I've tried the 3 sisters before, trying to pick sweet corn, green beans, and maybe summer squash. Forget it. It's a mess. Vines are everywhere. Last time I did it, I did what I call machete gardening. I had to enter the corn patch with my machete and literally chop my way through the mess. It was a disaster. So I have stopped doing that, but there is nothing wrong with it. The plants are very compatible with one another. They're just not compatible with the way we like to harvest beans, squash, and corn in this country. With that in mind, if you want to get away from the straight row planting and the 4 rows by 4 individuals rule, you can do the hill form where things are done in circles. And so I usually used about a 3-foot circle, and I tended to space the corn plants 10 to 12 inches around the outside of the circle, so you get enough individuals there then with the pollen falling in a circular fashion on the hill that you'll probably pollinate most of it. That's the whole point. This is all about pollen dispersion. Hand pollinating corn is ridiculous. You don't want to mess with that kind of stuff. So you get your stuff planted so it's going to take care of pollinating itself somehow or another. This crop of corn, it should be ripe maybe 2.5 months or so. We finished the last crop, I think, maybe about a month back. Currently, I have flamed the area where the corn was to remove slugs, stubble, and whatever weeds that were out there, and replace the area with tomatoes. It's a very large planting of tomatoes this year. I am confident it's going to be an excellent tomato year in Puna. If it's not, I'm going to have a big crop failure. That's the way it goes. No real loss. Anyway, folks, there you go. I'm back to corn again, one of my favorite crops. So, y'all hang loose. Aloha. I hope you had a wonderful 4th, and a little late to say be safe, right? I hope you got all your fingers.